April 15th, 1363. Flames devour the last tower of a small castle in Aragon. At the summit of that burning tower stands a solitary knight, Miguel de Bernabé, clutching the heavy iron keys of the fortress in his gauntleted hand. Far below, an enemy army of thousands falls silent, awestruck. Miguel is utterly alone, the final defender of Castle Bagana, yet he refuses to surrender. He holds the castle keys aloft defiantly as fire and smoke rage around him. The message is clear. This castle will only be taken over his dead body. To understand how one man came to stand against an army, we must set the scene in medieval Spain. The year is 1363, in the midst of the War of the Two Pedros. This conflict, waged between two rival kings who confusingly shared the same first name, pitted King Pedro I of Castile, infamously known as Pedro the Cruel, against King Pedro IV of Aragon, nicknamed the Ceremonious. For years, these monarchs had been locked in a bitter struggle for territory and power. In 1362, the two kings struck an uneasy truce, but it didn't last. The very next year, King Pedro of Castile seized a moment of advantage. Believing his Aragonese counterpart was unprepared, Pedro the Cruel broke the peace and launched a massive invasion into the Kingdom of Aragon. With a reputation for ruthlessness, he led a powerful Castilian army across the border, aiming to seize key towns and fortresses. The invading Castilian force was huge. Chroniclers speak of tens of thousands of soldiers marching under King Pedro's banner. Contemporary accounts describe 30,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and dozens of siege engines rolling into Aragon. They swept through the frontier, sacking villages and surrounding castles. Aragon, caught off guard by the sudden onslaught, had few royal troops on hand. King Pedro IV of Aragon was away and had disbanded many forces after the recent truce. The defense of the realm fell largely to local garrisons and communities, who now faced a colossal army on their doorstep. By spring 1363, the Castilian invasion honed in on the community of Daroca in northeastern Aragon. The historic town of Daroca and a ring of nearby castles guarded a strategic route into the heart of Aragon. King Pedro of Castile wanted these strongholds neutralized quickly. One by one, his forces subdued smaller fortresses in the area, sometimes through intimidation alone. Many villages and castles, seeing the overwhelming odds, surrendered rather than face the wrath of the Cruel. Indeed, King Pedro had already earned his brutal nickname. In captured towns, his troops would slaughter resistors and mutilate survivors as a warning. Surrender might mean mercy, but resistance virtually guaranteed a gruesome fate. It is in this desperate context that the siege of Castle Bagana unfolded. Bagana was a small castle a few miles from Daroca, perched on a low hill above a village of the same name. It was not a mighty citadel by any means. Its stone walls and towers were modest, its natural defenses limited. Yet this little castle suddenly became the focal point of one of the war's most dramatic episodes. Miguel de Bernabé, the Castellan of Bagana, would soon be tested as few knights ever have been. In early April 1363, the Castilian army arrived at the gates of Bagana. Imagine the scene. King Pedro of Castile himself, astride his warhorse, surveying this small fort. Encircling the hill are thousands of enemy soldiers, their tents and banners sprawling across the countryside. The villagers have fled or hidden. Siege engines, giant trebuchets and battering rams, are positioned to pound the walls. By contrast, inside Bagana's walls there are only a handful of defenders. Miguel de Bernabé commands a tiny garrison comprised of local Aragonese villagers and militiamen loyal to Daroca. Perhaps a few dozen men at most stand with him, and sheltering inside the keep are Miguel's own family, his wife and young children who live in the castle's main tower. There is no realistic hope of relief from the Aragonese army. King Pedro IV's forces are still gathering far away in Zaragoza and cannot arrive in time. In short, Bagana is on its own, David against Goliath. King Pedro the Cruel, eager for a swift victory, commences the siege not with an immediate assault, but with an offer. Trumpets blare and a royal herald approaches the castle under a flag of truce. The terms shouted up to the ramparts are generous in appearance. Surrender immediately, and no harm will come to the defenders or their families. In fact, the king promises rewards and honors if Miguel de Bernabé simply opens the gates. After all, from the invader's perspective, further resistance is pointless, and he would prefer to take the fort intact. The dozens of Castilian siege engines poised nearby underscore the message. Refusal means certain death. All eyes turn to Miguel. The Aragonese Castellan now faces an excruciating choice. He is vastly outnumbered, surrounded, and cut off. The enemy king himself is offering him life, freedom, even riches for yielding. On the other hand, Miguel has sworn an oath of fealty to his own king and a duty to protect the people under his charge. Surrender would mean betraying that oath and handing over his post without a fight. Medieval codes of honor weigh heavily on him. And Miguel de Bernabé is nothing if not loyal and proud. From atop the battlements, Miguel gives King Pedro his answer. Bagana will not yield. According to later chroniclers, Miguel de Bernabé declared his fidelity to King Pedro IV of Aragon and to the community he served. He refused the bribes and safe conduct offered by the enemy. It was a brave, some might say fateful, decision. With this defiant reply, the siege of Castle Bagana began in earnest. Defiance in the face of death, King Pedro of Castile does not take the refusal lightly. Stung by the Castellans' insolence, he orders his forces to attack. Siege warfare in the 14th century was merciless and methodical. Soon, the quiet country around Bagana erupts into cacophony. Catapults and trebuchets sling heavy stones that crash into the castle's walls. Archer and crossbowmen unleash clouds of bolts at any defender who shows himself. Day after day, the bombardment continues, shaking the humble fortress to its foundations. Inside, Miguel and his men do all they can to withstand the onslaught. They return fire with their own bows and crossbows from the ramparts, trying to pick off enemy engineers. They brace the gates with timbers and rocks, douse potential firepots with water, and repair damage to the walls overnight as best they can. But the odds are impossibly stacked against them. With each passing hour, the walls crumble further under the pounding. Sections of the outer defenses collapse into rubble. Bagana's courtyard is soon exposed, and Castilian soldiers begin to rush in through breaches. Miguel's tiny garrison suffers casualties and despair. Some of his men lie dead or wounded from the relentless barrage. Others see the hopelessness of the situation and lose heart. According to accounts, one by one the defenders started to abandon the fight. A few may have tried to slip away at night. Others might have thrown down their weapons and surrendered to the attackers, hoping for mercy. Despite Miguel's inspirational leadership, the spirit of his men falters as the fortress is literally beaten down around them. King Pedro's troops press the attack relentlessly. They force their way into the lower bailey once the walls are sufficiently breached. Now only the central tower, the keep, remains as a last refuge for the defenders. This stout tower, where Miguel's family is located, becomes the final stronghold. Miguel de Bernabé, refusing to flee or surrender, withdraws into the tower and bars its door. By this stage, nearly all of his men are gone. Some have been killed in the fighting, while the rest, as the chronicles say, ended up abandoning him. Incredibly, Miguel finds himself completely alone in continuing the defense of Castle Bagana. The lone Castellan stands against an entire army. From within the tower, Miguel keeps fighting. He positions himself at the narrow windows, the arrow slits, of the tower, and looses arrows down at the invaders now swarming the courtyard. Eyewitnesses later recounted that Miguel continued shooting arrows at his enemies, despite having no one left at his side. We can imagine the scene. The solitary knight, possibly wounded and exhausted, rushing from embrasure to embrasure in the tower's upper chamber to fire his bow, then darting to another firing point to give the illusion that the tower still has multiple defenders. Each arrow Miguel launches finds a mark among the besiegers, and for a brief time, he single-handedly keeps the attackers at bay. The Castilians, massed below, might be astonished or even hesitant. A single man is denying them full possession of the castle. Such is the ferocity and determination of Miguel's resistance. Seeing that brute force alone might not dislodge this final stubborn defender, King Pedro tries again to break Miguel's will. Under a temporary ceasefire, envoys call out to Miguel in the tower, renewing the offers of safety. The Castilian king promises Miguel de Bernabé a full pardon, freedom for his family, riches and honor, if only he surrenders the keep. It would be so easy. He need only toss down the castle keys and open the tower door. Outside, an army waits to either save him or slay him, depending on his choice. Miguel's reply is the same as before. No, he will not yield his post. All the wealth and honors in the world mean nothing to him compared to his duty and honor. Equally, the knight is well aware of Pedro the Cruel's reputation. Any promises from that quarter may prove false, and after witnessing the massacre and mutilation of other Aragonese captives by this king's army, Miguel surely knows surrender could still mean death, or worse, despite the fine words. He chooses to stand fast. In this moment, the lone knight's courage and resolve reach their peak. Miguel de Bernabé will fight to the very end, come what may. The final stand. Fire and faithfulness. With negotiations rejected yet again, King Pedro's patience runs out. If one obstinate knight refuses to bow, then that knight will burn. The Castilian soldiers receive orders to set the tower ablaze and finish this siege. They gather dry brush, wood, and pitch and heap it at the base of the tower and in any openings they can find. Using ladders or long hooks, they stuff flaming torches and bundles of burning kindling through the arrow slits and windows of the keep. Before long, smoke begins curling out from the tower's upper windows. Inside, flames catch on timbers and furnishings. The stone keep itself is turning into a fiery oven. Miguel de Bernabé is now truly in a deadly trap. Fire spreads rapidly within the tower's rooms. Thick smoke fills the stairwells and chambers, stinging the eyes and choking the lungs. Down below, the Castilian troops have withdrawn to a safe distance, surrounding the tower in a tight ring to ensure no escape. They watch as orange flames lick out of the windows. The heat inside must be overwhelming, blistering, and inescapable. Still, Miguel does not surrender or attempt to flee. He climbs up to the top of the tower, determined to make his final moment one of defiance. As the roof and floors beneath him begin to collapse, Miguel appears at the highest parapet. His figure, clad in armor and illuminated by the inferno, is visible to the thousands of onlookers below. In his hand, he holds the large iron keys of Castle Bagana, the literal keys to the fortress that the enemy so desperately wants. With a last burst of strength, Miguel thrusts his arm upward, displaying the keys for all to see. It is a gesture of absolute resolve. He will not hand over these keys to the invader. The castle will burn with him before he submits. According to later legend and eyewitness testimony, that image of Miguel atop the flames seared itself into memory. For a few heartbeats, time seems to stop. The Castilian soldiers on the ground can only watch in a kind of awe at this lone knight's bravery. In that dramatic tableau, Miguel de Bernabé becomes the very embodiment of knightly loyalty and honor, choosing death over dishonor. Finally, with a thunderous crash, the burning tower can bear its own weight no longer. The upper floors give way, timbers and stone plunging into the inferno below. The walls themselves begin to crumble. Miguel, still grasping the castle keys, falls into the collapsing ruin as the Tower of Bagana comes down around him. The lone knight's stand has ended in a roaring cascade of fire, smoke, and rubble. Aftermath. A hero's legacy. When the flames died down and the victorious Castilians moved in to inspect the smoldering debris, they found Castle Bagana reduced to charred ruins. In the wreckage of the keep, amid blackened stones and ash, they discovered the remains of Miguel de Bernabé. One chronicle recounts a poignant detail. Among the ashes, Miguel's armored arm was found still holding the 2 iron keys of the castle, as if even in death he refused to let them go. It's a detail so striking that it passed into local legend, the final proof of how steadfast this knight had been. Amazingly, as the soldiers searched the ruins, they made another discovery. Survivors. In a lower vault of the tower, protected by thick masonry, Miguel's 2 young children were found alive. Whether by Miguel's efforts to shield them or sheer luck, the little ones had been spared the fire that consumed their father. The Castilian king, perhaps moved by an iota of respect after witnessing Miguel's courage, allowed the children to live and later released them. There is less mention of Miguel's wife. It's possible she perished in the blaze, or was not in the same protected spot as the children. The sources focus on the children, who became known as Los Libertados, the liberated ones. King Pedro of Castile had finally taken Castle Bagana. But what a Pyrrhic victory it was! An entire royal army had been held at bay by a single determined knight. The siege that was supposed to be an easy triumph had instead become a symbol of heroic resistance. The time and effort lost at Bagana and nearby Daroca thwarted Pedro the Cruel's plans of a quick conquest. Indeed, the Castilian king soon abandoned his push towards Zaragoza and diverted his campaign elsewhere. The stubborn defense of places like Bagana gave Aragon precious time to rally. In the larger picture of the war, Miguel de Bernabé's sacrifice contributed to slowing down the invaders. King Pedro of Castile would eventually sign a truce, the Treaty of Murviedro in late 1363, and never fully conquer Aragon. The war dragged on in stalemates, but Aragon survived, thanks in part to local heroes who bought time with their lives. News of Miguel de Bernabé's last stand spread across the kingdom. In Aragon, Miguel was hailed as a local hero, a martyr to loyalty. The sheer audacity of his solo defense and his dramatic death made him a legend. King Pedro IV of Aragon, the ruler whom Miguel died serving, recognized the Castellans' extraordinary fidelity. Some years later, in 1372, the king and the Cortes, the Aragonese Assembly, formally honored Miguel de Bernabé posthumously. In a public act, they granted Miguel's surviving children and their descendants privileges and exemptions as a reward for his unswerving loyalty. The family was essentially ennobled and freed from certain taxes and obligations. A royal thank you to the lineage of the man who had given everything for his king. It was recorded that King Pedro IV himself, along with the highest nobles and officials, praised Miguel's deed in words that compared him to the great heroes of antiquity. Over time, the Bernabé family proudly memorialized Miguel's sacrifice. They adopted a new coat of arms that vividly depicted the story: a castle in flames, and atop it an armored arm holding a set of keys. This heraldic symbol ensured that every generation remembered the incredible feat of their forebear. Even today, this tale survives in local history books and folk memory as an example of medieval chivalry at its purest. Miguel de Bernabé's stand at Castle Bagana is often recalled as one of the most heroic last stands in medieval Spain. It has all the elements of legend: a lone knight, an unjust invader, impossible odds, and a fiery climax. Yet it truly happened. In the annals of medieval warfare, there are many sieges and battles, but few feature a single man holding out when all others have fallen. Miguel's defiance in the face of certain death stands as a testament to the ideals of honor and loyalty that knights of the age held dear. In the end, Miguel de Bernabé did not save his own life, nor did he save Castle Bagana from destruction. But through his sacrifice, he saved his honor, inspired his people, and won a place in history. His story is a reminder that sometimes the bravest victories are not about defeating the enemy, but about refusing to be defeated in spirit. The lone knight of Bagana kept faith with his king and his duty to the very last breath, and in doing so, achieved a kind of immortality.